Welcome to Releasing Your Inner Dragon, where story creators talk story creation. Drake is an award-winning fantasy novelist and creative writing teacher. You can find his epic fantasy series, The Genesis Oblivion, on Kindle Vella. Marie runs a fantasy world-building channel called Just in Time Worlds, and her first book, The Hidden Blade, is available on Kindle Unlimited. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast with Drake and Marie. Today, we're actually going to tackle a pretty esoteric kind of topic, I think, anyway. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about kind of how I view the actual craft of prose. We're actually going to look at sentence structure and stuff like that as patterns and the way I kind of see them. And hopefully this might actually help you in your own writing think about things a little different.
So we got onto this topic when we were discussing the difference between narrative prose and the internal voice of the character prose, and why these two things need to both be present in a story in order for the story to really paint the picture for the reader. So we're hoping that with this episode, we can show you how to really make a deep, immersive picture that also includes the internal voice of the character as well as the external descriptions around them.
Well, and it even goes a little deeper than that, because the reason, like the document that I'm going to share, the reason why that was even created, one of my writers in my writers group is a fantasy author. He's well-versed in English grammar and all that. He doesn't make any of those mistakes. There was just something about it. And he's been in my group for about a year. And I've never truly enjoyed, like, he's very imaginative and I like his characters and I like his growth and I like his stories and all of that. But the reading of the story, I've never really enjoyed. Shame on me. It took me a year to figure out why. But in one of our last meetings, and I don't know why it clicked for me, but I was reading through it and I went, I just figured out, and I shouldn't have said it like this, but it kind of hit me out of the blue. But I was like, I just figured out why I don't like your writing. Which was a terrible thing to say. And I was like, no, not like that. Because he's a really imaginative, good storyteller. But what I realized was he was only using one type of narration. It really did open my eyes to go, this is it. And then he rewrote that and sent it back to me, with these changes that we're going to talk about. And I was like, yes, this is good. I like this. And so it was, it really was factual that because he was only using this one type of narration, that it didn't make the narration read well. It read weird, and I never really liked it. I was never really immersed. So that's kind of where this comes from. So you may actually be doing this because, again, he's well-versed in English. The stories were fine. No one else had a problem with it, but it just never, and it wasn't that it was bad. It just didn't read great to me. And I felt like I should like it better than what I was actually enjoying it when he would read.
Drake's going to share his screen, and you're going to see that it's hugely highlighted.
This is actually my opening story to that big 20 novel fantasy saga thing. So this is literally the very first page of, 6 million words of story. And I just started here, and this is what I sent to him when I had discovered this. And so that's why there's all these different color-coded things, because we're going to talk about these and why they're different and read them and kind of see kind of how they flow a little bit different. But before we do that, I do want to kind of go down the path of what I call patterns. And this is something I have been teaching, over the last, especially 5 or 6 years. It's a little more highbrow than what I would normally do in like a 40-minute class or whatever. But recently I've been opening up to it, last 5 or 6 years. And so what I talk about is these patterns. There's several layers of patterns, but the two topmost patterns, in my opinion, go with sentence structure patterns and information patterns. You really do have to be varied in your sentence structure. You do not want to have the same sentence structures over and over and over again, because it becomes very rote. So like this line 15 here, finally he moved. So the sentence is he moved. We could put a period here, finally being an introductory clause of that. The example I use when I'm teaching this is running into the kitchen, comma, the dog slipped on the banana peel. So running into the kitchen is an introductory clause. It's information that we're giving to the reader, but it doesn't necessarily have any, it isn't a part of the sentence because it's separate. It's this other piece of information that we're tagging on to the sentence. The dog slipped on the banana peel. The dog being our subject, slip being our action. That's our sentence. Running into the kitchen is a clause in front of that.
Let me ask you quickly, since I've come across this comment a few times on various critiques, what is the difference between an introductory clause and a comma splice?
So an introductory clause has no tense. It has no subject. It literally isn't a sentence at all. So running into the kitchen. What's the subject of running into the kitchen?
Nothing. There is none.
Nothing. There's no subject. So that's what an introductory clause is. It's a piece of information. If we get into the details of really diagramming sentences, and I say this all the time, to be a professional writer, you have to diagram sentences, but all you have to be able to do is pull out the subject and the action. All of those other things that you learned in 8th grade with all those lines and jokes and circles and triple underlines and all that crazy stuff, you don't actually need any of that to be a professional writer. But for a discussion like this, that's when you're like, well, we got to actually dig a little deeper into that diagramming model. And so that's really what you start to find is that we're going down that. So a comma splice would be a complex sentence or a compound sentence, depending on how it's used. More than like it's a compound sentence. The day turned out to be warm and we had a great time at the park. The day is the subject. Turned out is the action. We is the subject, had a great time is our action. We have 2 complete sentences that we have an and. So that's a compound sentence. And so a lot of comma splices can be that. They're compound sentences divided between that. But they can be complex sentences too. So there's 4 main, it gets much more complicated than this, but I like to talk about 4 main. Simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and then compound complex sentences. Those are kind of the 4 patterns that I look at. And so as I'm writing, and I'm not going to go into the details of what those are, you can Google that. There's a ton of information out there about those 4 types, main types of sentence structures. And if you go crazy, you'll start learning all sorts of different things. But the gist of it is when you're dealing with that, those are patterns. So if we wrote, Drake walked into the kitchen, period. Drake picked up a pot of water, or a pot, period. Drake walked to the sink, period. Drake filled the pot with water, period. Drake walked to the stove, period. Drake put the pot of water on the stove. And you have these simple sentences that, and of course we could change it to he if I didn't want to use Drake. I was just trying to be emphasizing it. Those are simple sentences, and we definitely want them. We definitely want to use simple sentences, especially simple sentences are something I recommend that you use more than not once you get into action, because then that really makes them read those sentences fast and it gives that illusion of speed, even though they're still just reading at the same rate. They're just consuming these information quicker. So we definitely want them, but you don't want an entire paragraph of them because it's this rote thing. And it's the same thing. I had one person in the writers group who literally every sentence, I'd say about 80% of the sentences through the entire scene was introductory clauses. Running in the kitchen, comma, the dog slipped on the banana peel, biting his own, or biting his tail, comma, the dog ran in a circle, and every single one. And that also creates a very rote read when every single one is this introductory clause and then a sentence introductory clause. It's the same thing if you're using clauses at the beginning of a sentence, clauses at the end of the sentence. These are all different things that I kind of see as patterns. And we want to use them. We want to use complex sentences. We want to use compound sentences, run-on sentences, fragmented sentences, because again, creative writing, the first word is creative. So don't get hooked up on well, you're not allowed to use fragmented sentences because that's incorrect grammar. Yeah, because we're not writing grammar. We're writing creatively. And so sometimes, that one-word sentence or even that one-word paragraph is so powerful for the audience to consume that's what we want to do. And so that's one of the patterns. One of the patterns is just thinking about sentence structure, and obviously that bleeds into paragraph structure too. Paragraphs are vitally important on how you structure them, what information you contain in them, how long or how short they are, and you want to be varied. It even goes down to like the opening. So we have my thing here. If we go down and look at the first word of every one of them, we have Latimus, but we don't have Latimus again until here. And then we have Latimus somewhere else down here, I thought I saw. So we have, here's a hovering over it all. There you go. Hovering over it all is a
Introductory clause.
We have all these different ways that we're starting patterns, breaking patterns, starting patterns, breaking patterns. But really what that leads to is the next layer of patterns for me, which is the type of information. And there's only a few types of information. You have narration, you have dialogue, which includes inner monologue, and you have action. And so one of the things that I try to do, and technically I break my narration into two kind of subcategories of narration of what's going on in the now of the story and world building narration. And so I do think about those different. So technically I think about 4 different patterns: world building, now narration, dialogue, inner monologue, and action. And what I try to do is never have one of those patterns run for more than a paragraph or two. And you'll see that if you read my writing and you start paying attention to the structures, like here we've got narration. Latimus, this is the now narration. Latimus the thief stood holding the reins of 3 horses. So this is going on now. This is going on now, and the colors are for something different, so we'll get into that in a second. But the day had remained pleasant. This is all the now. Forced him to thumb his hair, blah, blah, blah. The sky above, blah, blah, blah. So this is all now narration. And then we hit dialogue. So I've broken the pattern now of now narration. I've broken it with some dialogue. Then I get a little bit of now narration, but look, I've broken that now. So here's world building. We get into this down in here. So now narration broken by dialogue, now narration, and then down here. And while he tried to pay attention to the 3 L's as they spoke, while he tried to pay attention to the now, the sight of the great mist captivated him as it always did, a few hundred miles wide in places. It was an ever-present fog stretching over 1,000 leagues. So now I've gotten into world-building narration. So I've broken the now narration up with world-building narration. To make it easier on me, one of the things that I've done is I actually have trained myself to use certain sentence patterns for certain types of narration patterns. Because when I'm in action pattern, I'm going to use much more simple sentences, shorter sentences, maybe some comma splice or some introductory clauses. I like introductory clauses in my action because you can go dodging to the left. He punched him in the groin, so you have these 2 different things that are kind of happening in order. And so I really like that because the reader can consume it really fast and it works really well. And then I'm not just stuck with the simple sentences. When I'm in my narration modes, either backstory or world building or just now narration, I'm more using complex sentences or compound sentences, longer sentences, maybe some run-on sentences every now and again. Usually I don't use fragmented sentences except for in those action, moments, because again, now we're even shorter sentences, a 1-word sentence, 2-word sentence, whatever. So I've just kind of trained myself that the pattern of information that I'm giving to the audience, which I'm going to break as quickly as possible, is also going to kind of have sentence structures that they use more than the other information types. And since I rarely have more than maybe a page of one type of pattern, then you're only going to have a page of that sentence structure as well, because then I'm going to break. Because obviously if you get in a fight scene, you're going to be in action for maybe a whole page or a page and a half because, action's going on. But even still, the action, I'm still looking for that. Can I break this up with a now narration? Can I break this up? Because I'm definitely not going to do world building during an action pattern, but I could do, we still have to set the scene. You got to show the readers where everybody's at all times. And so I can definitely break those up and put those in there, or dialogue. And so that's what I try to do. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why people love reading what I write. So what I noticed from this gentleman's writing is that every single piece of narration was directly tied to the POV character. There was no straight narration. As I've talked about, I write in true limited. So and that's, I think, where this writer kind of got confused, because he's in my writers group. So he's trying to learn kind of my way. And so since I talk about true limited being everything from the narrating character, I think that might've been one of the reasons why he was like, well, the narrating character has to be a part of every single piece of narration, but it doesn't. Because remember, even in true limited, everything that's seen, everything that's heard, everything that's smelt, everything that's felt is being done by the narrating character. So if you just say the ghost floated down the hall, well, the only way that line can be in there is if the narrating character saw it. You don't have to write Drake watched as the ghost floated down the hall. because first of all, it's filtering, and we talked about that already, or I think we did.
Briefly.
But secondly, if the ghost is being described, then the narrating character is describing it. So you don't have to. And so what he had done was everything had a connection to the character. The character was in every line, every single line. And it really did make me not enjoy the story as much. So what I did here with the color coded, and for you that are just listening on the audio podcast, I'll try to make sure that I'm reading this stuff and really kind of pointing it out, is I color coded it between, so the green is where the character is attached to it, either visually, emotionally, whatever, but they're attached to it. The yellow is all just straight narration. The blue is dialogue or inner monologue. In this first page, there's only inner monologue. And then the purple is how what is being seen, felt, smelt, whatever, actually affects the character. So it's more emotional.
Let's start with the green at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for our podcast viewers, just read that out. So the green is the narration that's attached to the character. Right?
And the reason why this is, sorry, go ahead.
That's what all of the character, that's what the other dude did, right? He did all of it attached to the character. Yeah.
Right. His is all green. So if we start off, the first paragraph is all connected to the character. So the character's name is Latimus. So I'll just read it.
Mm-hmm.
Latimus the Thede stood holding the reins of the three horses as he strained to hear the conversation between the two seasoned rangers and the gnarled old farmer. But at this distance, even his keen elven ears could pick up nothing more than low murmurings as the three other elves conversed. So first of all, one of the things, if you've read me, I try to open, and this is just a Drake thing. I'm not saying that you should do this, but I try to open every scene with the full name of the narrating character. It's kind of my cheat sheet to say, hey, reader, this is the head you're in. So as you get deeper into the book, as soon as and if it's not on the first two words, it's in the first sentence. It's always in the first paragraph. And if I just don't want you to know, there is a couple times where I don't want you to know whose head you're in. And then I do play with you on that. But pretty much, if I'm going to start a brand new story, which is what this is, the very first two words are always going to be my POV character. And that's just, I'm not saying that that's what you should do. That's just what I do. That's a Drake kind of mannerisms. So that's what we do. Latimus a Thede. Bam, you're right there. I've got a little bit of conflict here. He stood holding the reins of the three horses as he strained to hear the conversation between the two seasoned rangers and the gnarled old farmer. Wait, I'm in the head of a character who's not even a part of what's going on? Well, why is that? Why? I thought this guy would be a hero that I'm following. How come he's not in the mix of things? So to me, that's a little, that piques my curiosity. Again, it's subjective. It might not pique yours, but that's it. That's it for me. And then, but at this distance, even his keen elven ears, why did I throw that in there? Because the readers don't know that these guys are elves.
Isn't that even his keen elven ears? Isn't that a very light form of, as you know, Bob?
Sure.
Like comparative.
Sure.
Yeah.
But the reason why I feel, and again, subjective, so I could be wrong, but the reason why I feel it works is it's not, as you know, Latimus is an elf. And so all elves have, keen ears.
Yeah.
So it's not, one of the things that's the hardest, I guess, for some of the things that I teach, like don't use the as you know dialogue, don't tell, don't info dump. Sure, those are the golden rules. But the reality is you still have to give this information to the reader somehow. So there's another one down here. If we look at line 6, this other piece of green, we're talking about the wind, and it said, but it also forced him to continually thumb his long blonde hair behind his ears. Would he think of the fact that his hair is blonde, or would he just say it, even long, even if it's just me, I'm just gonna be like, yeah, but this damn wind, I got to keep tucking my hair behind my ear. I wouldn't think about it being long. I wouldn't think about being blonde. So you do have to cheat some. You have to look for organic ways, or as organic as you can figure out on how to get this information to the reader. Because I don't think anybody is going to read this and go, but at this distance, even his keen elven ears could pick up nothing more than low murmurings. I don't think anybody's going to read that and go, wow, why don't you just shove in my face that he's got elven ears? And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to look for ways to write this stuff to where you're giving information to the reader, but they're not offended by what you're giving them. They're not going, wow, talk about treating me like a 3-year-old. And because that's what that's really what, as you know, dialogue does. It insults the reader. And so, and again, it's subjective, but I don't feel, even as keen Elven English could pick up nothing more than low murmurings, is babying the readers, insulting the readers, or any of that. So I don't think anybody's going to take offense to that, even though you're right. It is kind of a little bit, a very, brushing of the, well, as you know, but I have to give this information. It's the same thing with that last line. As the three other elves conversed, why did I include that? Because, okay, so Latimus Athede is straining his keen elven ears, so we can go, okay, Latimus Athede is an elf, but all I've said about the other three people is 2 seasoned rangers and a gnarled old farmer. You don't know what they are. So by throwing in the other 3 elves, or the 3 other elves conversed, it makes you go, oh, okay, all 4 of these characters are elves.
So the next line of dialogue is in yellow. And
next line of narration.
Yellow is the now narration.
Okay? So it's not connected to the character directly, like all of those other sentences from that first paragraph. They're all basically connected. They're connected to Latimus's, what he's doing, what he, his ears, what he's hearing, and so on and so forth. So they're directly connected to him. But then the next paragraph, the day had remained pleasant. A cool breeze blew constant enough to thwart off the warming sun, or the warming spring sun, but it also forced him to continually thumb his long blonde hair behind his ears to keep it out of his face. Above, the sky sat clear and blue, though clouds approaching on the western wind promised rain later in the day, or perhaps sometime that night.
What's interesting to me here is that this paragraph is actually interspersed. So from the day remained pleasant, the cool breeze blew constant enough to thwart off the warning sun, that's all now narration. Then the bit about him brushing his hair back, that's connected to the character. And then
it's a compound sentence.
Yeah.
Because we have comma, but.
Yeah. And then we go back into the now narration where we're like, above the sky, clear, blue, etc. But I guess that also comes to the other thing that you always emphasize, which is, what does it mean to the character? So the fact that the wind is blowing has an effect on Latimus. Latimus has to keep brushing his hair back, and it's getting in his eyes, and it's annoying him.
And that's it. So it's about making things personal. So even though those first sentence and a half, because you got the first sentence and then half of the second sentence, are literally just narration, the narration is still effective. And even like the funny thing is the second sentence above, the sky set clear and blue, though clouds approaching on the western wind promise rain later in the day or perhaps sometime that night, that affects them, because guess what happens that night while they're camping?
It rains.
It rains, and they have to deal with it. That's it. That's kind of a callback line for me, which I love callbacks. It's a very minor one. I wouldn't even call that a callback, but it definitely is what I would call that. I talk about when you're dealing with pot devices, you have to treat them like a farmer. You have to plant them and then tend them and then reap them. So this is me planting that it's going to rain tonight. The funny thing is, a little later on in this scene, one of the rangers says, yeah, but I smell rain on the wind, so we'll have to break out the tents. So that's tending it. And then that night it rains. Now, I don't really consider that a plot device. I'm using it because it does still fit with that definition. But that's really what I think about all the time. It's, if I'm going to use anything, I've got to plant it, I've got to tend it, I've got to reap it. Plant, tend, reap, or plant, tend, reap, however you want to do it. Because obviously the more you tend it, the better. That's kind of what that is. So it still affects the character, even though it doesn't affect him in this paragraph. And it's kind of the same thing with the next one. Almost the entirety of the next paragraph is now narration, not connected to the character, except for this one clause in the middle of the first sentence. So I'll read that. The farmstead, the fourth they had visited so far this day, was typical of those in this area. A small one-room house squatted near a large barn, fenced-in areas containing a handful of long-haired oxen or mud-caked swine rested close to these structures, which were themselves surrounded by several score acres of tilled land. So pretty much all of that is just setting the scene, now narration. It's not connected to the reader. I don't actually have much of it affect Latimus because it's a farm. It's just a farm. It's not going to really affect him since he's seen it so often before. But what does affect him is the fourth they had visited so far today. Yeah. And so I bring that to him because he's like, you know, it makes you kind of feel like we've been trudging through farm after farm after farm. First of all, it asks the question of the reader, why are these? Because you don't know anything yet. You know that there's a guy holding 3 horses. There's some rangers talking to a farmer. They're on a farm. The day is kind of nice. This is the 4th one. Like, you don't really know anything. And to me, that unknown is a driving factor that makes you want to continue reading on to find out what is going on here. It's a mix. It's how does it affect him? Most of it doesn't affect him because it's just fences and oxen and swine and buildings.
And you do have things like that. Like sometimes you need to describe the scene because you need to know what's in there. Like sometimes a room is just a room.
Yeah, you have to set the scene. You have to, again, what do we do at the beginning of a scene? We have to ground them into the narrating character's head. We have to ground them into the location that they're at. And we have to give them something that makes them want to continue reading, some type of conflict, some type of desire. And so is this a pretty weak desire? Yeah, you just don't know what's going on. That's kind of a weak desire, but I like it. I do this on purpose because this is a 6 million word, 20 novel saga. I'm going to start off pretty flat. Just kind of, we're just going to go a little bit. And then the hill will get steeper as we go further and further through this series. So that's those first 3 paragraphs. All narration, all now narration, technically, but then I break that pattern. So I've only got 3 paragraphs of narration before I break the narration pattern. And I break it with dialogue. It's inner monologue. And we're going to talk about this a little later because I do want to talk about, I think Marie also wants to talk about narration because we both use inner monologue very differently and both are right. It just depends on how you want to use it. So we'll get into that in a second, but I want to continue on with this pattern. So after he describes the farm, I like my inner monologue to be almost an even deeper dip into the character. So we just described the farm. We described that it's pretty mundane. And then the inner monologue is honest work for honest folk. And it's just him thinking, yep, this is the way that most people live. And this is a good way to live. There's nothing wrong. He has a positive outlook on this. And so that's what I'm doing. But it still breaks the pattern. You're now in dialogue. And even though it's only 1 sentence, you're still in dialogue. Let's get into a couple of these because now we're going to throw in some purple in here. And purple to me is more emotional. So there's other things, the 4th day of visit so far today, you could say, well, there's a little emotion in there because maybe he's frustrated, but I don't actually say that. I don't say that he's frustrated. I just let you know this is the 4th. You, Marie, just said he was frustrated. And that's what I want you to do. But you're really kind of imprinting that on the line. I don't give it to you. You're giving that to me. And that's what I did. I created this line to hopefully have a reader imprint annoyance or boredom or whatever on this. It's that subtext. And that's really what you're trying to do. When you're writing, you want to write with some subtext. You want to allow the reader to kind of, infer information that isn't explicitly written, but they should be able to glean on their own. And that increases their enjoyment and increases their engagement in the story. It increases their desire to continue reading. Now we get past, we're past that piece of inner monologue. And the next paragraph reads, Latimer smiled at the thought, but the smile slipped as his gaze drifted north. So that's now I'm giving you more emotions. I'm actually, showing you that he's happy that he thought honest work for honest folk. So that, again, kind of drives home that that's a positive thought, not a negative thought to him. He likes these people. He doesn't dislike them. He doesn't look down upon them. Yeah. But then I hit you with but the smile slipped as his gaze drifted north. Now, literally nothing in the first 3 paragraphs make you go, wait a minute, what is north? That like, this was just a farm. What the crap is going on? So again, I did that on purpose to make the readers go, oh, wait, what's north? Like, what terrifying thing is there if he's not, if the smile is slipping from his face? And then I go back into now narration with a little bit of emotional to show how Latimer feels about this in this next paragraph. Hovering over it all, the dominating expanse of the great mist extended to the horizon, broken only by the occasional rocky peaks of the highest mountains concealed within its tormented domain. Latimus didn't envy the farmers who lived so close to such a place, yet he knew why they did. These were the most fertile lands in all the empire. Again, it's all narration, not connected to Latimus. It literally is just me describing and setting the scene, but I introduce in the middle of it how Latimus feels about this place. He does not envy them. He is not, this is that should imply danger. It should imply risk. And then I also cap it with the explanation of why they would take this risk, why they would live here, because they're the most fertile lands in the entire empire. Again, it's about breaking those patterns. It's about throwing things in. Even though this is all narrative, it's still a couple different types of narrative.
Analyzing it like this brings out that element that I don't think everybody thinks about, especially when you write your initial draft. Your first draft tends to be, your puke draft tends to be action and maybe emotions
Dialogue.
and dialogue. Like, that's it, right?
I don't
And
even,
then,
on my first draft, I don't
Yeah.
even do emotions. I just do action and dialogue.
Yeah. And then you've got to come back and put in the prose. But
Yeah.
there is sometimes a temptation, I guess, to do prose either just connected to the character, so you don't do any of the additional information,
Mhm.
or not at all connected to the character.
Right.
You're literally just describing what a camera would see.
Yeah. You've dripped into omniscient. So even though all this yellow, all these lines that we've been talking about that are yellow aren't explicitly, like this line, hovering over it all, the dominating expanse of the great mist extended to the horizon. That's not explicitly saying that Latimus is doing this, although the paragraph before it said his smile slipped as his gaze drifted north. So you should be able to infer that information there. But again, the line itself is not, I don't say Latimus cast his gaze over, toward over the dominating expanse of the great mist or whatever, because again, I don't like doing that. First of all, that's filtering and crappy, but you still want to mix that in. You want to mix that in with just straight up narration.
Yeah.
But notice there's no big chunk of yellow. Every piece of yellow is chopped at some point with something else.
If you just put in like 5-6 paragraphs of all yellow, of all basically now narration, what the scene looks like, then you start falling into that wordiness, floweriness, where, Tolkien got away with it, but you probably won't.
Well, Tolkien got away with it because he was first, and he was in 1954.
Yeah. In terms of the internal monologue, I do want to talk about a little bit, because here for me is one of the differences that one can talk about in prose and in narrative voice, because I also use internal monologue, but I don't use it as a dialogue equivalent. Like, you put it on its own line and you put it in italics, which is an indicator that it's an actual thought.
So what she's talking about, if you look at the highlighted baby blue, line 14, honest work for honest folk, that's it. It's a paragraph by itself. It's italicized. If we come down to line 32, so the line before it is, no one understood how the heavy fog was created, nor why it never evaporated, though most had theories. And then the next line is, and I doubt any are correct. By itself, italicized. And the reason why they're always by themselves, always italicized, always with no narration whatsoever, is it starts within 2 or 3 pages. Even if you've never read me before, within 2 or 3 pages, that just becomes the character's voice in your head and this deep connection that you have with that character. So I'm teaching you this. I'm training my readers over the first couple of pages that these are inner monologue, so that I can use them more effectively as we go along. But it is something I have to teach my readers, kind of train them, which is why these two on this first page are written the way they are. They have what they have. They connect so deeply to the line before them or the line after them. Almost always the word thought is in the narration of either the sentence right before the first piece of inner monologue in anything that I write, or it's in the sentence following the first inner monologue that I write. And it's always on purpose. So line 14, honest work for honest folk. Line 15, Latimus smiled at the thought.
So the way that I do inner monologue is more focused around the free and indirect discourse method, which is to say I don't have direct internal monologue like a dialogue tag. So I would never say, and I doubt any are correct. But I would say, and Louis doubted that any are correct, or Latimus doubted that any are correct.
If we look at free indirect discourse,
Yeah.
that's that middle ground between omniscient and
Yeah.
true limited. I write in true limited. Tolkien wrote in true omniscient. Most people are writing in what you write, which is free indirect discourse, which means there's this huge, because what I wanted to tag onto that is you can write in free indirect discourse and do what I'm doing here. You
Yes,
can
you
write direct inner monologue. That is a choice of the writer. Both are correct in that free indirect model. You're closer to the omniscient side of how you use it, but you can be closer to the limited side as you use it. I want to stress that there's no wrong answer to any of these, so you can't say, oh, Drake uses it wrong. No, I don't. I use it 100% correct for what I want to do.
Yeah.
Marie uses it 100% correct for what she wants to do and how she wants to portray her stories. You're using it 100% correct for how you want to do it in your story.
As long as you don't have internal monologue and omniscient, because then you're doing it wrong.
You really
you're
are.
not doing it wrong, but you're doing it wrong.
Yeah, you're doing it wrong. It's just like I always say, if you ever head hop, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And any people.
The reason why internal monologue is wrong for omniscient voice is because the omniscient narrator knows what the character is thinking, but cannot speak on the character's behalf, because the story is being told by the omniscient narrator, who cannot internally monologue on someone else's behalf.
So with omniscient, you're creating this illusion that the narrator is sitting next to the reader, telling them what they're both watching. So they're outside of the story and they're telling what's inside of the story. And so when when that narrator slips into direct inner monologue into one of the characters, now the reader's like, wait, am I in that character's head, or are you telling me what's in that character's head? And that's why you should do it like what you do it, where, and he wondered if he could ever do this, because that's much more of an omniscient side of the scale. And if you're in omniscient, that's the side that you're 100% on. Whereas with me, you'll never see that line. You will never, ever, ever, ever see the line, Latimus wondered. I'm so entrenched in that limited perspective, that true limited. There is no third party ever. Same thing in first person. Why can't you have two POVs in first person, or why shouldn't you have two POVs in first person? Because in first person, you're creating this illusion that I'm inside this one character's head.
Yeah.
If you put me in a second head, you break that illusion, and now you have to create the illusion again, and that is never great for the reader.
Yeah.
And so that's really how I kind of describe the whole omniscient free indirect discourse and all that. It's about what illusion are you trying to create? What vehicle are you surrounding the reader with as your mode of telling this story?
And I think that ties back to these different kinds of prose, because the illusion that you're building requires you to have different bricks. It requires you to have different things that engage the reader at different times and keeps them inside that illusion. So some of it needs to be, this is how the character feels. And some of it needs to be, this is what is around the character. And some of it needs to be, this is the conversation and the action that's going on around the character. And all of those need to be there to keep the reader engaged in the story.
All of these rules, remember, are not rules. Creative is the first word of creative writing. So even though I said you will never, ever, ever see me write Latimus wondered, I kind of do it on this page in something that we read. So if we go back up here to the line that starts on line 18, Latimus didn't envy the farmers who lived so close to such a place, yet knew why they did.
Yeah, that is kind of...
It is kind of in that, but again, to me, it's not as harsh as he wondered or he thought. It's more of the reason why I use that and don't mind using that is because it's a fact. He knows it's a fact. It's more of a now narration in my mind. And then it goes to these were the most fertile lands in all the empire. I could absolutely change that.
Yeah.
Latimus didn't envy the farmers who lived so close to such a place, period. But I know why they do. These are the most fertile lands in all the kingdom.
Yeah.
But that's too much. One of the things I do try to do with my inner monologue is I try to truncate them. A lot of times my inner monologue are not even complete sentences. They're much more, because we don't really think in complete sentences. We think in much more choppy things. So I try not to write the line, and not that I haven't, but I try not to write the line, but I knew why they do. These are the most fertile land. That's a really big, long, complete thought. And I try to, not that I succeed. There's absolutely times that you will see me use that type of inner monologue because I feel it's the right thing to use at that time. But I really do make an attempt to make my inner monologue choppy, short. So again, all of these rules we talk about, don't go, oh my goodness, Drake said, Marie said, I got to do. No, we're just explaining you the rule. And then once you learn it, it's then use it most of the time, bend it some, break it others. Just be very careful as you bend and break, because the goal of bending or breaking rules is that the reader should never notice that you bent or broke the rule. And as long as the reader never, it's sort of like Marie popping me on his keen elven ears. She pops me on the rule. I'm like, you're right. And I'm bending it here. I don't think I'm breaking it. I think I'm bending it. But again, I feel like, and again, how do I test it? How do I know that I've bent it or broken it in a way that readers don't know? I get people to read it. And if they read that and they never, ever mention it, they never stop, it doesn't even become on their radar, then I obviously have done the right job of bending or breaking that rule, because no one noticed. It didn't stand out to anybody. It didn't throw anybody out of the story. It didn't stop them from reading. It didn't read odd to them. And so therefore I've succeeded.
I do have to say one thing. I think the reins of your horses have got little crowns on them, because I think that G shouldn't be there. So it's one of the mistakes that I have to correct in my writing all the time, because I always put that G there for some reason. The other mistake I always make is I write lions instead of loins. So sometimes Tahil, my left-hand husband, is wearing a loin cloth that roars out of his thighs.
But I have a dry erase board that literally just has words that I misspell continuously. And now I'm gonna have to put reins on there. But it's got like sense, and sense, the 3 different types of sense. It's got through, though, thought,
trial,
thou,
and trial.
Well, the crazy thing is this first page I've used as an example in my writers group several times over the last 6 months.
We've just read it out loud.
Right. But I'm saying you have a group of writers that are getting printed copies of this, that they're reading along with me, and you're still the first person that was ever, unless those horses are royalty.
That's not the right word there.
So yeah, it's just there's going to be those mistakes by design and on purpose. If you're actually putting thought to what you're doing, then I'm behind you. Now you have to go one step further than that. You have to get it tested out, which the only way to test it out is get a bunch of people to read it that don't love you, that don't care about you. So not your mom, not your spouse, like literally strangers that will kick you in the teeth and not feel bad about it. But as long as you're going, look, I'm going to write it this way because I feel that this is the right thing for my readers, not for you. If you do that, if you go, oh, I write it this way because that's the way I want to write it, then I'm against you. I don't like you. Screw you. Writing is not about you. Writing is about the reader, always. And I will never, ever stop beating that drum. Writing is always about the reader. But as long as you're going, you know what, I think the reader's going to really appreciate this. I think the reader's going to really be terrified because I'm doing this, or be, overjoyed because I'm doing this, or be sad because I'm doing this, or really enjoy this narration scene because of this. If you're thinking about it and doing it on purpose by design, then more than likely than not, you're going to succeed, as long as you're putting the reader first in your mind.
Yeah.
And then you do still have to test it. You do the best you can for the reader, but then you have to go, and you have to be willing to have your beta group, whatever, go, look, this really sucked because of this, and go, okay, all right, I thought I was doing a good job for you guys. You guys tell me I didn't, so let me change.
And you have to really listen sometimes, because sometimes you'll get a little bit defensive and you'll be like, but that wasn't what I meant. And it doesn't matter what you meant. It matters what they read.
It matters what they consumed.
Yeah. So that was different patterns in prose and why they're important, and some thoughts on inner monologuing and the various kinds of inner monologuing that you can get. Oh, and whether horses can wear crowns.
And whether horses can wear crowns.
And we will see you for another one.
Bye. Keep writing. Hey guys, Drake here. Thank you so much for listening to Releasing Your Inner Dragon podcast. I hope you're getting a ton of information and maybe even some nuggets of gold that you can take into your own writing to help you on your journey of story creation. A couple things I want to throw at you. First of all, for the first time in years, I am opening myself up to being a private mentor again. If you would like for me to work with you to improve your writing right now, reach out to me. You can either go to my website, maxwellalexanderdrake.com, and send me a contact form, or just email me at author@maxadrake.com. Also, as many of you may know, I've been out of the novel game for quite a few years. I was the lead fiction writer for EverQuest Next from Sony. I've been in the movie and TV industry for a few years now, but I am excited to say I'm back into the novel game. I've actually been working on a novel for a little while now, and I'm going to start dropping it on Amazon's Vella. So if you're on that platform, look me up, Maxwell Alexander Drake. Thank you again for listening, and as always, keep writing.
Hi guys, this is Marie from Releasing Your Inner Dragon, and I hope you're enjoying the podcast. If you're interested in more content on fantasy world building, head over to YouTube and look up Just in Time Worlds. I release tons of content there. If you'd like to check out my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, it is available as an ebook, audiobook, and print book on Amazon. Thanks for listening, and see you soon.